Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. For the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, October 26, 2025, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about a Saturday afternoon where Ohio State was idle and did not play, but there were still a lot of really interesting results from around the Big Ten that I'd like to touch on quickly. I'm also going to spend most of our time here today talking about Ohio State's next opponent, the reeling Penn State Nittany Lions, who will invade the Horseshoe next Saturday. But first, I want to do a quick whip around the Big Ten, starting in Bloomington. Number 2, Indiana 56, UCLA 6. The Bruins came into this one feeling pretty good about themselves on a 3-game winning streak. I thought maybe Nico Iamaleava would give UCLA a puncher's chance to make this a decent game, and the Hoosiers weren't having any of it. It was 14-0 after the first quarter, 35-3 at the half, and 49-3 at the start of the fourth quarter. Folks, under Curt Cignetti, the Hoosiers do not play down to their competition. They absolutely eviscerate lesser teams, which is what you would expect from a legitimate national title contender, which the Hoosiers are. Let's not make any mistake about that. 3 more touchdown passes from Hoosier quarterback Fernando Mendoza, who, according to FanDuel, by the way, is tied with Alabama's Ty Simpson for the best odds to win the Heisman Trophy. The Hoosier defense held the Bruin offense to 201 total yards and limited Nico Iamaleava to 13 of 27 for 113 yards passing and 2 picks. Hoosier fans, I think you can go ahead and book your travel for December 6th to Indianapolis. Your team is going to the Big Ten championship game. In Seattle, Washington 42, Illinois 25. This was one of 2 what I would consider CFP elimination games in the Big Ten yesterday. Now, if you're a regular listener of this podcast, then you know I was never buying Illinois as a legitimate playoff contender. And yesterday, the Huskies drove the final nail in the coffin of the Illini's playoff hopes, while also keeping their own playoff hopes alive. 346 yards of total offense and 4 passing touchdowns from quarterback Damon Williams Jr. in this game. 10 catches for 153 yards for receiver Denzel Boston in this game. He was great. At 6-2, the Huskies have 3 very winnable games at Wisconsin, home against Purdue, and at UCLA before hosting number 6 Oregon in what should be an absolute banger to end the regular season. I hadn't really considered Washington a legitimate playoff contender, but with that remaining schedule, it is not out of the realm of possibility for the Huskies. In the second of the 2 Big Ten CFP elimination games, Iowa 41, Minnesota 3 for the coveted Floyd of Rosedale Trophy in Kinnick yesterday. Not surprisingly, the Hawkeyes won this game with great defense and special teams. They had a pick 6 and a punt return for a touchdown in this game. The Hawkeyes are second nationally in total defense, right behind Ohio State. The only blemishes on their record are a 3-point loss to Iowa State and a 5-point loss in the final minutes to number 2 Indiana. They have next week off before hosting number 6 Oregon on November 8th. Then they travel to LA to play USC on November 15th. Now, in our season preview pod, I took a flyer on the Hawkeyes as a dark horse pick to make the CFP. If they can upset Oregon in 2 weeks, and I think they can, and then find a way to get out of the Coliseum with a win over the Trojans, they're going to be right in the thick of the playoff race with a very strong case. There's a logjam of 5 2-loss teams in the Big Ten at the moment who are all still alive, technically, for the CFP. Iowa, Michigan, Washington, and Nebraska are all 6-2. USC, who was idle yesterday, is 5-2. Now, of those 5 teams, I think Michigan has the best chance to make the CFP. They have a good defense, an excellent running game, and of course, a dynamic playmaker at quarterback in Bryce Underwood, who I think is only going to get better as the season goes along. The Wolverines were 31-20 winners at Michigan State last night. They have 3 very winnable games against Purdue, Northwestern, and Maryland before hosting the Buckeyes on November 29th. Now, Michigan, they're going to have to win out to get to the CFP, and of course, that would include beating the Buckeyes. But as we're all painfully aware, the Wolverines own a psychological advantage over the Buckeyes at the moment, and that game is in Ann Arbor. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but that game is shaping up to be a banger as well, as it almost always is. And, look, some folks on this particular podcast have been pretty dismissive of Ohio State, Michigan as a game now devoid of any real stakes because of the expanded 12-team playoff. But at least one of those teams on November 29th will be fighting for its playoff life. And it's very likely the Buckeyes will be fighting for their first berth in the Big Ten title game since 2020 in that game. So a lot to play for both teams, more than likely, in that game on November 29th. Okay, let's turn our attention to next Saturday. The Penn State Nittany Lions come to Columbus for what we all assumed for months would be a top 3 matchup with Ohio State, both for pole position in the Big Ten and the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. Now, those are still very much the stakes for the Buckeyes, but Penn State has only pride to play for in this game. Unless you've been living under a rock, then you know Penn State is currently on a 4-game losing streak. They fired longtime head coach James Franklin after a stunning 22-21 home loss to Northwestern 2 weeks ago. Starting quarterback Drew Aller was lost for the season in that game after suffering an ankle injury that required surgery. It has been an absolutely disastrous 2025 season for Penn State. Interim head coach Terry Smith will lead the Nittany Lions into the horseshoe for a noon Eastern kick on Fox. According to DraftKings and FanDuel, the early line on this game is Ohio State minus 20.5. The over-under is 44.5. This will be the 40th meeting between these schools on the gridiron. Ohio State leads the all-time series 26-13. The Buckeyes have won the last 8, which includes a 20-13 win in Happy Valley last season. Now, we've seen a few spectacular tumbles from the top of the preseason polls this year, but none more shocking than that of Penn State. Penn State started number 2 in the first AP poll of the season. Phil Steele had Penn State ranked number 1 in his preseason power poll. Athlon and Lindy's both had Penn State number 2 in their preseason polls, and both predicted Penn State would win the Big Ten and play Texas for the national championship. All 3 of those publications, Phil Steele, Lindy's, and Athlon, had pretty much every Penn State position group ranked among the top 5 or 10 in the country. Penn State had 4 players, Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, and Zane Durant, as well as Denai Dennis Sutton in PFF's top 50 list to start the season. And James Franklin made what was considered at the time the best coordinator hire of the offseason in defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, a name Ohio State fans know very, very well. And he brought in 3 highly productive veteran receivers in Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, and Kyron Hudson to address what was believed to be the only area of weakness on their roster. So the stage was set for Penn State to roll through their 2025 schedule. Now, if you listen to this podcast, you know I was highly skeptical that Penn State could bear the weight of those lofty expectations. But even I didn't foresee a collapse as spectacular as this one. It's crazy to think that just 1 month ago in Happy Valley, Penn State, which was ranked number 3 at the time, erased a 14-point fourth quarter lead against number 6 Oregon and had a 24-17 lead in overtime of that game. James Franklin and Drew Aller were 4 downs away from overcoming their reputation as a coach and a quarterback that could not win a matchup game. Instead, Oregon scored consecutive touchdowns to retake the lead. Drew Aller throws a terrible game-ending interception, and the Penn State season begins to completely unravel. Offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki was supposed to elevate the Penn State offense when he arrived from Kansas, but he's been a square peg, round hole fit in Happy Valley pretty much from day one. Now, I think that was masked by the greatness of Tyler Warren last season, who was pretty much Penn State's entire offense. This season, though, it's been more obvious that Kotelnicki's scheme and play calling just weren't going to elevate Drew Aller as a quarterback and weren't going to elevate the Penn State offense as a whole. And I'm not sure freshman Ethan Grunkmeyer, Aller's replacement, is going to be a better fit in Kotelnicki's offense either. Grunkmeyer had a rough debut last Saturday at Iowa, 15-28 for 93 yards passing at 3.3 yards per attempt, 2 picks and no touchdowns. Through 7 games, Penn State ranks 99th nationally in total offense. They're tied for 82nd in offensive yards per play. They're 110th in passing offense, and they're 55th in rushing offense. Now, I think the player who figures to touch the ball a lot in this game is running back Kaytron Allen. He is far and away Penn State's best, most impactful offensive player. Allen comes into this game off one of the best performances of his career in the loss at Iowa last Saturday. 28 carries, 145 yards rushing, and 2 rushing touchdowns for Allen against an excellent Iowa rush defense. Before Franklin was fired, there was this weird thing happening where Andy Kotelnicki seemed to forget that Allen was on the roster. Only 12 carries for Allen in the loss to Oregon, only 8 in the loss to UCLA. Now, interim head coach Terry Smith is probably not going to make that same mistake the rest of the way. I would expect Allen's carries in this game against Ohio State to be at least in the high 20s, maybe even in the 30s. Penn State still has a pretty good offensive line, and the Ohio State defense hasn't yet been tested by the kind of downhill rushing attack Penn State has with Allen. At the same time, look, Allen hasn't really done much in his career against the Buckeyes. 27 yards on 12 carries in last year's game, 26 yards on 9 carries in the 2023 game. The best game he's ever had against the Buckeyes was as a true freshman in 2022. Allen ran for 76 yards on 12 carries and a touchdown in that game. I'm not really sure what's going on with Allen's running mate, Nicholas Singleton. Singleton and Allen were widely considered the best running back tandem in the country coming into this season. And Allen has held up his end of the bargain with 612 yards rushing at 6.2 yards per attempt and 9 rushing touchdowns. But Singleton so far has not been very impactful. Only 274 yards rushing at 3.6 yards per carry and 6 rushing touchdowns. Singleton is only averaging 2.7 yards per carry and has only 1 touchdown over Penn State's last 4 games, which were all losses. And he's not been very impactful as a receiver out of the backfield either. Only 95 receiving yards for Singleton so far this season. Through 7 games, Penn State's trio of transfer wide receivers, Devontae Ross, Trevor Pena, and Kyron Hudson, have all been, quite frankly, a disappointment. Only 6 touchdown receptions between them. Ross leads the group with only 255 receiving yards, and Pena is their leader in receptions with only 23. Finally, redshirt freshman quarterback Ethan Grunkmeyer. Look, he's going to be making only his 2nd career start in this game. Grunkmeyer comes into this game with 109 career snaps and only 41 career pass attempts under his belt. According to 24/7 Sports, Grunkmeyer was a 4-star prospect, the number 103 overall player in the 2024 class out of Lewis Center, Ohio. It's 6'2", 212 pounds. He's not the big strapping dude that Drew Aller is. And, he looked completely overwhelmed in his season debut at Iowa. Again, only 15 to 28 for 93 yards passing and 2 picks in that game. On defense, Penn State is still very good, but under Jim Knowles, it's not been the elite top 10 unit that it was under Tom Allen last season or Manny Diaz in 2023. And there have been a number of late game failures by Knowles' defense that have cost Penn State games this season. Just last week against Iowa, with Penn State leading 24-19 with under 5 minutes to play in that game, the Penn State defense allowed Iowa quarterback Mark Gronowski to rumble 67 yards to set up the go-ahead touchdown. And then the week before, leading by 5 in the 4th quarter against Northwestern, the Penn State defense allowed the Wildcat offense to march 75 yards on 12 plays, eating up almost 6 minutes of the game clock for the go-ahead touchdown. And that game was in Happy Valley. Penn State comes into this game 20th nationally in total defense. They're 17th in defensive yards per play. They're 29th in scoring defense, and they're 91st against the run, allowing 159 yards per game. That's just shocking given their personnel on defense. Though, look, to be fair, a season-ending injury to probably their best linebacker, Tony Rojas, had a lot to do with their struggles defending the run, I think. Statistically, Penn State is still very good defending the pass. They're 5th nationally in pass defense, but, look, that might be more a function of their schedule. Oregon was the only good passing offense they faced to date, and Dante Moore threw for 248 yards and 3 touchdowns on them in that game. Penn State has also struggled to make plays behind the line of scrimmage. They finished in the top 5 nationally, both in sacks and tackles for loss each of the last 2 seasons. Through 7 games this season, though, they're tied for 81st in sacks and 62nd in tackles for loss. They're also not forcing turnovers at the same rate as the last two seasons. In 2023, Penn State was 13th nationally in takeaways and tied for 10th nationally in takeaways last season. Through 7 games this season, they're tied for 67th nationally in takeaways. So look, we're talking about a Jim Knowles defense that struggles to make plays behind the line of scrimmage and force turnovers and get late game stops. Where have we seen that before, Buckeye fans? Defensive end Denai Dennis Sutton is Penn State's highest graded defensive player according to PFF with an overall grade of 84. Dennis Sutton is also their leader in pressures with 20, but he only has 2 sacks so far this season. Safety Zakie Wheatley is another player to watch on this Penn State defense. Wheatley is their second highest graded defender with an overall grade of 83.5, and he's also their second leading tackler behind linebacker Amari Campbell. You very rarely see teams with as much talent as Penn State in a situation like this. They have NFL players all over their roster, but only pride to play for with still 5 games left on the schedule. And look, they're on a 4-game losing streak, yes, but it's not as if they've been getting their doors blown off. Penn State's 4 losses were by a combined 13 points. And they lost to Oregon in overtime by 6, and their losses to Northwestern and Iowa were by a single point. I think this is kind of a rough spot for the Buckeyes. I mean, they're facing a team that's still one of the most talented in the Big Ten, but won't get much credit, if any at all, for winning this game, however they end up doing it. And look, if they don't show up ready to play on Saturday, they could lose this game. At the same time, Ohio State is a very different animal from anything Penn State has seen so far this season, and that includes Oregon. By the way, Oregon, I'm still not sure how good they actually are this season. Their best win is Penn State. They lost by 10 at home to the best team they played so far this season. That was Indiana. And they struggled at home last night to put away a reeling Wisconsin team. Now, I know they lost Dante Moore in the third quarter to what looked like a broken nose, and there was some weather in that game, a lot of rain, but only 335 yards of total offense for the Ducks in an ugly 21-7 win over the Badgers last night. I'm setting my concerto meter for this game against Penn State at a 5. Now, that would normally be very high for a 3-4 team with a redshirt freshman quarterback making his first career start in the horseshoe against the number 1 team in the country. But that's how much I respect Penn State's talent. Again, the early line on this game, according to both DraftKings and FanDuel, is Ohio State minus 20.5. The over-under is 44.5. Now, I heard Bill Landis say that the Penn State running game with Katron Allen will be a good tune-up for Michigan's running game, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, both are downhill running attacks. There are some similarities, no doubt, in both rushing attacks, though I think Michigan's running game is more explosive. But it's hard to imagine a one-dimensional offense that is among the worst in the FBS at throwing at the football, having a lot of success against the Buckeye defense in this game. The weather forecast in Columbus is calling for rain Wednesday through Friday of this week. Now, if the rain does seep into Saturday, it could turn this game into a slog, and that would give Penn State a puncher's chance. But it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. The rain is expected to clear up by Saturday. Highs will be in the low 50s. It'll be overcast. If Julian Sain is going to mount a serious Heisman candidacy over the next 5 weeks, he's going to have to play well in this game. The weather's not going to be great. He's going to be going up against a defense that, at least statistically, is very good against the pass and should be able to put a decent amount of pressure on him. This would also be a good time for the Ohio State running game to get back on track. The Penn State defense has been vulnerable to the run this season. Again, they're 91st nationally against the run, allowing 159 yards per game. They're tied for 70th nationally in opponent yards per rushing attempt, allowing just over 4 yards per carry. Now, Bo Jackson will start for the Buckeyes, but will we see more of fellow freshman Isaiah West in this game? I think so. I think West looked pretty damn good against a solid Wisconsin rush defense last Saturday, and he showed that he can, he fits the job description for an Ohio State running back. He can make that first tackler miss, and he shows a really nice burst when he gets into the open field. The Buckeyes are 6-0-1 against the spread so far this season, but I would not be surprised if this is the first game they don't cover. I expect Penn State to play loose and free and with a lot of pride in this game. Like the Buckeyes, they were idle yesterday, so they've had an extra week to rest up and prepare for this game. They have a defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles who is look, very familiar with Ohio State's personnel and tendencies. I think Penn State's going to put up a good fight next Saturday. But look, over the course of 4 quarters, Ohio State's firepower will eventually win out. I like the under in this game, and I don't think the Buckeyes will quite cover those 20.5 points. I like the Buckeyes to win it 27-9. Then they're back on the road to West Lafayette for a date with the Purdue Boilermakers. All right, that's going to do it for me. Short and sweet. Look for a recap of Ohio State, Penn State, as well as a preview of the Purdue game next Sunday afternoon. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.